Alright, here we go with some goggles action, and we have won the die roll. So this hand is pretty solid. We've got 4 lands, and one of them is a temple, which we can potentially pitch if we want to Tormenting Voice. We also have Fiery Temper, which we can pitch to Tormenting Voice, so we've got a couple options here. It looks like our opponent may be on black-white. So I think I like just playing the tap land and then seeing if our opponent plays a 2-drop, we can pitch the Fiery Temper. So let's see what our opponent's fetching for here. Okay, it's a swamp. Interesting. Alright, so we drew Jace. Might as well just play Jace this turn, and we can continue to hold on to that Tormenting Voice, and it'll be very useful to us later on. Also, if we draw Goggles, we can just wait on the Voice, but it looks like our opponent's playing a bit of a control-ish deck, so this seems like a reasonable time, since we don't have much action, to just go ahead and cast Tormenting Voice, and we can discard the Drownyard Temple. So now we have Magmatic Insight. Let's go ahead and fire that off as well, discarding an island. And now even more Tormenting Voices. So this is something this deck can do, is it can sort of snowball the card drawing effects. But here's Gideon. So Gideon is pretty annoying. Let's see what we're able to do about this Gideon here. So, we can Tormenting Voice here if we want, and discard a Fiery Temper to try to kill the Gideon on a later turn. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll discard the Fiery Temper, and let's go ahead and cast it. So we can redirect to Gideon here, and that's going to put Gideon down to 1. And let's draw our 2 cards, and we'll see what we want to do. Okay, wow, so we actually drew Chandra. So we have a decision here. We can actually just cast Fall of the Titans in order to get rid of the Gideon. We could deal 1 damage to it, or we can wait on the fall. But I kind of like just going ahead, casting the fall, and we can get Gideon off the table here. So even though it's basically just killing the Gideon at this point, it still seems worth it. That card's pretty annoying to deal with. And next turn we've set up Chandra. So yes, we will redirect to Gideon and pass the turn back. Our opponent does have 5 cards in hand, so that's a little bit worrisome, but we were able to deal with the Planeswalker, and we have a reasonable follow-up. So, not the best circumstances for us, but also not the worst. Well, it looks like our opponent actually has a second Gideon, which is pretty annoying, as our Chandra isn't going to be able to effectively deal with the Gideon this turn, just because when we cast Chandra, if we want to tick it up, then our opponent can chump block with a knight, and that's kind of annoying. But since we drew Lightning Axe, we actually have quite a nice play here, in that we can go ahead and Lightning Axe the knight, and then play our mountain, and then attack the Gideon with our mainland. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll kill the untapped knight. This will mean we're waiting on the Chandra for a turn. But basically any 1-mana removal spell would have given us this option. So Gideon, we've successfully taken care of 2 Gideons at this point. But it looks like our opponent still has some gas left in the tank. Read the Bones. Read the Bones is pretty good against us. But we'll see what happens here. Our opponent's coming in for 2. And just passing. Interesting. So our hand is Tormenting Voice and Chandra. We should probably be worried somewhat about our opponent having something like a Ruinous Path or Anguished Unmaking for this Chandra, but at the same time, we don't have that much of a choice in this scenario. I think we have to play Chandra, plus it, and try to start getting aggressive. Our opponent can attack Chandra back with Shambling Vents and the ally token, but it would still leave Chandra in play. So let's just go ahead and make this play. We'll pass the turn to leave the land in our hand, so if we want to discard it to the Tormenting Voice, we can. And we're still thinking about a potential opportunity to get this Drownyard Temple back, but you know what? Our opponent actually had the Ruinous Path. That is really bad news for us, but okay. So here is a Chandra off the top, which is a pretty interesting draw. So the question is, do we actually cast this Chandra right now? We could attack our opponent for 4, or we could cast Chandra and we could tick it down, but then our Chandra would be gone. So a couple options here. If we attack our opponent for 4, then it becomes more of a race. So yeah, it's weird, but I kind of like just going ahead and trying to sort of mise this game out, because I'm not sure that we're winning if the game goes that many more turns. And if we play Chandra, our opponent can just attack it, or if we tick it down -4, that won't be good enough, because then our Chandra is just going to be off the table. So we'll go ahead and play our land this time around, and we'll just ship it back. And it'll be interesting to see what our opponent does. This draw of our opponent's has lined up pretty well against our draw, but we'll think about sideboarding, what we want to do, stuff like that, and we still have a chance in this game, but since our opponent's passing, it's pretty likely something is up. So we have the option here. We can just simply cast Tormenting Voice and see what we draw. We can cast Chandra, but if we cast Chandra, we don't really have a great line once getting Chandra into play. So let's go ahead, cast the Tormenting Voice, and see what we can pick up here. Our opponent also has Blighted Fen now, which makes animating one of our creature lands less appealing. So it looks like we drew Thing in the Ice and Fiery Temper, so not too much we can do here, but we can just go ahead and play the Thing and pass the turn. But you know, our opponent's likely gonna do something here, so we'll see what that is. And this could be bad news if it's something like a Secure the Waste. That is going to be lethal. So let's go to the next game. Alright, so what do we have here in terms of sideboarding options? We've got some negates. We also have Fevered Visions, which we can bring in. So let's go ahead and try to bring in these counter spells and the Fever Visions. And we can take out some spot removal. We didn't really see that many creatures from our opponent, so taking out some Lightning Axes, some of these Fiery Impulses, that seems pretty reasonable considering what we saw out of our opponent that game. So let's go ahead and try that. It may be that we want to keep in some of the spot removal, but we don't have that much room if we're going to board in all of these cards. Also, Thing in the Ice isn't that effective against black-white sort of mid-range control decks. We can board in a Rending Volley, which is decent here. Or we could board in Lightning Axe in case our opponent has something like Kalidas. So we still have our Fiery Tempers for removal and Fall of the Titans, so I think I'm fine with this configuration. And we are going to be on the play again, but unfortunately 7 spells, so let's go ahead and see if we can get a better 6. This isn't great, but we do have to keep it. Shivan Reef we can keep on top, and we can start here on a Magmatic Insight. We knew we were going to draw our second land, so it's pretty safe there. Alright, so it looks like our opponent is going to duress us, so we are very reliant on Jace this game. If our opponent has a quick removal spell for it, that's going to be pretty bad. What we would really like is our opponent just to play a 2-mana creature. But we'll see if that actually happens. Nope. Grasp of Darkness, that's annoying. So let's go ahead and cast Magmatic Insight here. And now we have our Drownyard Temple in the bin. We can't leave up Negate, though, because both of our lands come into play tapped. So we'll see what our opponent does this turn. Okay, Transgress the Mind. That's going to take our Fiery Temper. And we're sort of running on empty at this point. So, pretty annoying. We didn't draw Fevered Visions. This turn we can get back our Drownyard Temple. And we can sort of hope to draw one of our Haymakers. But multiple discard spells plus the answer to Jace. Our opponents had a pretty good draw, at least from what we've seen so far. So this is a little bit interesting. Our opponent's actually just animating the Shambling Vent. So, maybe that's playing around the negate that is already known to be in our hand. Oh, and that's my mistake. We didn't get the Drownyard Temple back that turn, but we can get it back next turn. So, already untapped, but it's okay. It doesn't really change our line of play. We're just going to play Jace here and pass. We have negate up in case of removal. Alright, I don't know why our opponent's casting Transgress the Mind when it's already clear that we likely don't have a 3-mana spell in our hand. But we can just go ahead and negate this Grasp of Darkness. And so we drew Fall of the Titans, which isn't really that good right here. Let's just go ahead and loot. Ooh, Fevered Visions. Okay. So Fevered Visions is definitely an interesting one to draw. So we have the option of which of these two cards we want to keep in our hand. The Visions at this point in the game isn't quite as effective, with our opponent already being at such a high life total. So I kind of like just going ahead, pitching the Visions, since it seems like our opponent isn't doing that much at the moment. And we can just go ahead and activate our main land this turn. And it could be that our opponent has something like a Ruinous Path again, and that would be annoying. But we also didn't want to tick our Jace down this turn, because then it leaves it vulnerable to a Shambling Vent attack. So I like going ahead and ticking Jace up. But there is the Anguished Unmaking, which is pretty annoying. So we drew Dispel. I don't think we can afford to sit on it, so let's just go ahead and continue the beatdowns. And so it looks like our opponent is starting to run out of removal, only 3 cards in hand. We'll see what this is, though. It's actually Ob Nixilis, which is pretty good, but it's not the end of the world. We can just go ahead and still try to pressure our opponent's life total with this land. I don't think we really want to start trying to attack Ob Nixilis here. But we have to be wary of the Shambling Vent on the other side of the table, capable of gaining our opponent valuable life. And if this is something like Sorin, that would be very bad for us, but okay, secure. So we can just go ahead and dispel it, and now we have the win in hand with our manland, and we also have Fall of the Titans for backup. So I wonder why our opponent actually main phased that Secure the Waste, but in any case, this game should be over with. So it looked like pretty early on we might not win this one, but actually the tides have turned in our favor, and this past turn I thought our opponent was going to try to use those Shambling Vents to gain some life, but it looks like instead Secure the Waste was the play, but we had already drawn Dispel for that, so worked out pretty well. And so we've seen very few actual creatures. It looks like our opponent's black-white control with Secure the Waste. So we have to keep that in mind. We've seen a number of Planeswalkers. So I like where we're set up here moving forward. We could board in a card like Kozilek's Return because we know our opponent has Secure the Waste. And we can take out our 1 Lightning Axe. Fevered Visions is a card we could shave, but I do like it in the matchup. So let's go ahead and keep it in. We'll keep the same configuration for game 3 pretty much. And double negate, so we're going to want to keep this hand. We've seen our opponent has mostly non-creature spells, so negate is almost a hard counter in the matchup, but we do have a lot of lands, so we are going to be looking for something like a Magmatic Insight or Tormenting Voice to kind of get us going. And yep, we're just going to kind of play what's likely to be a slower game here. We know our opponent has Transgress the Mind and Duress, so it would not be surprising to see a discard spell here. And so yeah, here is the Transgress the Mind, and we're just going to go ahead and trade it with a negate. We don't want our Chandra to hit the bin, and that's what the Transgress would be taking, would be the Chandra. So I like just going ahead and negating the Transgress. And yep, not too much we can do here, so it's pretty likely our opponent could have another big play here. It is going to be Read the Bones. So we have the option of countering the Read the Bones, or we could let it resolve. I just like going ahead and using our negate proactively, though. Our opponent could be stuck on lands we don't really know. And we can... Ooh, here's a Pia, so we can just go ahead and play Pia. And that's a pretty nice draw here for our 4th turn of the game. And Pia is great at pressuring a card like Ob Nixilis, which our opponent could easily have, or one of the other various Planeswalkers. And it looks like some spot removal is going to be used on Pia, but we still have 2 Thopters left over. And there's Fevered Visions. So I like just going ahead and casting the Fevered Visions and passing back here. Fevered Visions is going to help us. It could also help our opponent somewhat, since our opponent isn't going to be taking damage from it most likely right now. Although if they do pass the turn and draw a card, then they're going to be at 4 cards. So it looks like, okay, it's going to be Anguished Unmaking, taking out our Fevered Visions. But you know what? That's actually pretty good news, because that means it's not being used on Chandra. So here, I think we want to just go ahead and play Chandra, and we can plus it. And similar to last game, we're going to put real pressure on our opponent's life total here. And it looks like our opponent's going all the way down to 5. And once again, we have a Fall of the Titan sort of waiting in the wings. And we may end up using that as a burn spell to finish off the game, depending on how things play out. But Sorin is definitely one of the best cards our opponent could have here. And, yep, shooting down the Chandra completely. So we drew Kozilek's Return, which is not going to be... It's not going to help us in this situation. So we can't kill our opponent this turn, so let's just go ahead and activate our Manland, which we've already seen can be effective. We can go ahead and take the Sorin off the table and then deal a good chunk of damage to our opponent. So let's go ahead and do that. Seems like the right play. And then we can also follow up with Jace. So Sorin was very good for our opponent, but we're still on the front foot. Unless... Okay, that's bad. So Linvala, wow. Okay. So our opponent's back up to 10. Definitely is not making it easy on us. So let's go ahead and activate our Jace. And we'll see what we draw off the Jace. It is a Magmatic Insight, so we're definitely going to want to pitch the Kozilek's Return. That's not going to help us that much. And let's go ahead and cast Magmatic Insight here. We have a land we can pitch. And we actually drew in to Chandra. So that was quite an interesting draw. So we can go ahead and cast the Fall of the Titans here if we want to. And that's a pretty attractive option. So let's go ahead and just do that. And we'll keep the Chandra in our hand for later. So we can Surge out the Fall, getting rid of our opponent's 2 creatures. And we're going to make X 5, so the Linvala is going to be gone. We can plus Jace. And we're going to go ahead and get in for an attack here. So even though our opponents played some huge haymakers, we've had some answers. And we have a Jace now that we can use the flashback mode on Jace to recast our Fall of the Titans potentially. But it looks like Anguished Unmaking is going to take out our Jace. But this could leave open the window of our opportunity that we need in order to win the game with Chandra. So let's go ahead and play Chandra, and we'll see how our opponent reacts, but I'd be surprised if this wasn't just game. Yep.